Everybody, it is my honor to have Jeffrey Tucker here with me today. We're going to conduct an interview about the state of our country right now. The theme is Has wokeism, COVID lockdowns, and global technocracy sparked an awakening? And my first question to you, Jeffrey, is how has the tyranny on display in the 2020s fueled a return to faith and traditional values?
Well, I think for a long time we had a kind of a civic religion of trust in the commanding heights, and that includes the government bureaucracies, academia, science, big corporations, the system, whatever that is, and its interlocking networks. And in 2020, that system turned on the people with preposterous protocols, shutting schools and churches and businesses and forcing everybody into a wild kabuki dance that lasted for a very long time, and we are all waiting to see, what this is all about. And then they rolled out the great cure from the disease, which was for the vast numbers of people, more than 99%, an annoyance, but not actually deadly. And then they wanted to universalize this potion, which turned out not to work. So it's just too much, right? I mean, so this became that was by late 2021. This was a year and a half after the lockdowns had begun. The population incredulity had reached its maximum extent, and part of the purpose of the Biden administration was to prolong the period of revolt, to contain the revolt, got as long as possible. And they thought they had it all sewn up, owning all the major communication portals, election systems, educational systems, everything. They figured they could maintain control. And then the most recent election we just went through proved that that is not true. And there's a number of reasons for that. But in other words, I think what we're seeing here is a population-wide clamor for authenticity, and and whatever that is. I mean, it could be, healthier food, closer family relations, a reconnection to faith. This is what happens when orthodoxy, the sort of managerial technocratic orthodoxy completely flops. People are scrambling to find out, well, if that's not true, what is true? And that's more or less where we find ourselves.
It's an interesting phrase that you picked there, contain the revolt. If you could go back a few minutes, what do you mean by that? What was the revolt that you had in mind?
Since probably, I would say the mid 90s, you've seen a rising population-wide uh, distrust and really anger. I mean, it started small and it just grew and grew. Really, I would say it's since the end of the Cold War, because I mean, just to go back in time, we put up with a gigantic national security state and surveillance and high taxation and everything and regulation and everything that came with it over the course of the Cold War, because we had this allegedly ferocious enemy abroad we had to defeat after the end of the Cold War. It wasn't clear why this stuff existed, and you had on left and right a real clamor to return to normalcy. Well, normalcy simply would not return. In every election cycle, somebody was put up to kind of promise, whatever it is, government reforms, hope and change, whatever, some reform. But after cycle of this stuff, and nothing ever changing, then finally it's all just kind of exploded out into the open right now. But I think there's been a long effort to kind of contain, ever since the end of the Cold War, contain the population revolt against Leviathan and all of its works.
So, I remember reading this phrase and hearing it several times, especially during the height of the COVID hysteria, that the old normal is over, indicating that there was a past time and then there's a future time, and now we are in it. And yet, this weekend, as I was driving around, I was thinking to myself, all these restrictions, all of this nonsense that happened in the 2020s appears to be in the rearview mirror. It seems like, first of all, no one wants to talk about it. And second of all, it almost feels like it never happened. And so, if we go back to that phrase, do you believe, especially now based on the election results, that we have gone back to a sense of normal? And could it be even better now that people are awakened to their own empowerment, excuse
Yeah, the awakening is the difference between now and 2019. Well, we're never going back to those. There was a lot of trust back in those days, and people were shocked at what happened. I appreciate your comment, by the way, about walking around wondering what happened to us and what did, sometimes I wonder what it is that they really were planning for us. There was some crazy stuff
me.
that was unfurled in those months and years. And I remember an article that appeared. We were now about 6 months deep into lockdowns, and Anthony Fauci and his co-author, who since fired and disgraced and so on, wrote an article, a major scholarly piece for a magazine called, yeah, I don't remember the name of the publication, but it's a peer-reviewed journal. And they were speculating about the future, and they said, in order to protect ourselves from infectious disease in the future, we need a complete reconstruction of the infrastructure of social functioning itself. Um, and the predicate to this whole thing was a weird reconstruction of history dating back, I think they said 23,000 years or something, like, to the first day in which we began to develop the technology of moving around, and we started seeing population movements. They said ever since then we've been spreading disease, so we need to put a stop to that. And so they talked about a future of dispersing cities, ending all mass events, meaning like sports events and concerts and that sort of thing, having population-wide surveillance of the microbial kingdom insofar that it affects not just humans but all animals, and started raging against the existence of pets, that we keep pets in our homes has got to stop. And it was a crazy article. This was in August of 2020, and this is the he was the front-facing czar of the lockdowns, and here he is explaining what kind of world we're going to live in the future. And it was pretty chilling. I think a lot of crazy was unleashed, in that period. And I think maybe, yeah, I can't prove this, but sometimes I wonder if they really intended to abolish all retail shopping and put everything online and have just a handful of corporations distribute essential goods and services, depopulate, empty out the cities, vaccine passport survey. I mean, like a true dystopia. They might have imagined that they were going to do that.
Yeah, I get that sense as well. I mean, it seems that we got very fortunate in some ways and also very unfortunate in others. But, going back to that time, I remember Fauci saying something like this was the end of handshakes. We're going to have to bump elbows and we're going to have to wear masks incessantly. And then I think it's also very far from many people's consciousness that so many of our fellow Americans were willing to put us in FEMA camps. And COVID passports were widely accepted in some of the big cities. I can remember experiencing it in Los Angeles, and yet that time has completely gone. You look at public forms of entertainment, no one is wearing masks for the most part. Everything has gone back to normal, and this time period feels like it never existed. And
Mm.
I want to ask you, do you think that the reason why they weren't able to get their full agenda is there was more pushed back than they anticipated? And going back to what you mentioned about the innocence lost after 2019, and then I would say after the 2020s, do you think that something like this would not happen again based on the way people have woken up?
Well, something like that, it won't happen exactly the same way, but it's very possible that something similar could happen. And I think there are definitely the plans are in place. But it's going to take a more circuitous route the next time, and it's going to have to do with the control of the animal population. Uh, they're slaughtering birds, and they have been for the better part of 18 months, slaughtering chickens, and now we see the results in egg prices and that sort of thing, and a push for mRNA vaccines for for all livestock, is going on, and it's difficult for farmers to just say, "Oh, I'm not going to comply." So it was one thing, in Los Angeles, when, somebody just said, "Look, I'm not going to wear a mask. This is stupid," or "I'm going to refuse your shot. This is dumb." Okay, you can sort of not comply in that case, but if you're a farmer and the Department of Agriculture and its offshoots, local offshoots, are demanding that you vaccinate all your cows, or you're going to be shut down. I mean, I'm not sure how you refuse to comply with that.
Mhm.
So I think this is going to be the route, and I'm afraid it could be effective unless something is done really, really quickly to reverse the power of these bureaucracies over the population. I think your last question mentioned something about were you shocked at the extent to which people were willing to put their fellow citizens in FEMA camps? I think the important thing to remember here is the entire COVID response was a class-based imposition of controls by the professional managerial class against the working classes. This is like like a third of the population wanted to stay clean from the virus and enlisted, the top third wanted to stay clean and stay home and do their online lives and have the lower third deliver the groceries to the door, and the middle third just on universal basic income forever. That seemed to be it was very much a class-based thing, and so the compliance is not surprising because professional life in this country is all about going along. I mean, that's how we're trained. Universities train us this way in every single profession, whether it's law or sociology or human related communications or media, whatever. It's all about fitting in within a structure. So when the structure became universally compulsory and outrageous, that people had no real apparatus to mental, psychological, or financial apparatus to refuse to go along. So everybody just kind of played along because that's what our training has always been. This is the system. If you want to be successful, you want to be popular, if you want to have a good life, you go along with it. You get your A's, you go on to the next grade, you get your degree, you do your internship, you get your job, the money starts flowing. Under those conditions, you're not really in a position to suddenly become Thomas Paine.
Well, I think that I would add, I completely agree with everything you're saying. I think it begins as early as pre-K, maybe even earlier than that. But I think that
Yeah.
we're moved along in this cycle. But I would add one more way, which is social media encourages conformity. And so what will get you more views, will get you more liked, are finding ways to appeal to your fans and to your friends, to your followers, doing things that are get you that praise from other people. And so we're constantly coaxed into conforming, into going along, but especially the professional class that you mentioned. But it seems to me that the way to stave this off is eternal vigilance, right? We're in this, what I would say, a very good time period. I've been reading your articles with the Epoch Times and talking about kind of this Trump effect in which things seem to be on the upswing, not just you, but other editorial columnists as well. But it seems to me that at any time the shoe could drop. How do we remain vigilant so that if these other preparations that you discussed, especially with farmers, if they begin to come into fruition, how do we stay vigilant to make sure something like this never occurs again?
Yeah, eternal vigilance sounds great until you can't pay your cell phone bill. This is the problem. So the strangulation of people financially is the means by which they have controlled the population. And what's fascinating about this, what's going on right now, is what you see is a real turnabout. So, everything that the government did to the population, uh, in terms of surveillance and censorship and financial strangulation and sudden closure of your businesses and demanding of compliance and everything. That whole apparatus has now been turned on the government itself by the Trump administration.
Mhm.
And so people are getting notifications, you're fired. Oh, they can't do that to me. Well, wait a minute. The whole government did that to a third of the population, back in 2020 and 2021 and following. They're firing people left and right, um, just as a matter of course, and surveilling people. Now, Trump wants to surveil the government, and they're saying, no, no, you can't look at the books. You can't come to our bureaucracy and have access to the payment systems. Nobody's done that in 80 years. So like, this is I think one way to understand what's happening with the Trump administration is they're doing to the government what the government did to us over the last 5 years.
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier that one of the ways to stop this is to halt the bureaucracy. Do you believe that this will work towards that?
We're just at the beginning of that, and it's a measure of how bad the problem is that there's such wide-ranging hysteria over really quite minimal cuts. I mean, we've got excluding the military, we've got a civilian bureaucracy under the executive branch in this country, and the federal government doesn't include state and local of 2.4 million employees, and most of them have assumed that they've have had lifetime employment. I don't know where we are in terms of retirement buyouts and fires, and I mean, you're seeing real estate prices in D.C. and Northern Virginia collapse because everybody's headed for the hills. But you have to remember the scale of what we're talking about. Let's just say that maybe 100,000 people have experienced certain level of job instability over the last month. That's nothing. I mean, the federal bureaucracy is 2.4 million. And if they can fire, 500,000 people, that's still going to put us at 1.9 million employees of the executive branch, so it's still going to be gargantuan. And I'm not sure that anybody really imagines they're going to be able to get rid of 400,000. So, we are just at the very beginning of this, but the level of freak out about what's happening right now is astounding. I mean, I read the New York Times every day, and they're just losing their minds. And CBS and all the major news people, they're all going crazy over what, in fact, is very marginal changes, so far anyway.
Right. Well, it goes back to, I think, what you mentioned earlier, that idea about authenticity. So many people, myself included, are going to alternative media because we just don't believe that this is true, what they're telling
Yeah.
us. Um, but I want to attack this angle from another way. Going back to this question of vigilance, it seems to me one way beyond the bureaucracy is to awaken people to what is going on. And different generations, the older generations, remember a time before when you went to when you went to get on a plane, you weren't searched so profoundly. You weren't treated like an animal. So
Hmm.
they can remember a time before 9/11. They can remember a time in which people weren't surveilled so dramatically. They can remember a time in which we had more rights than we do today. So knowing that, it seems to me one of the dangers that we have is with the younger generation. Not only are they unaware of this other time and the freedoms that we once enjoyed, but they're not as active. They don't care as much about these things that we're talking about. Men,
Hmm.
especially young boys. How I have two young boys. How do we get them invested in what is going on right now? How do we get them to be awakened and to care about this? Because they, of course, will be the future eventually, and they need to take an interest in these things.
I think the most important thing you could ever do for children is figure out a way to employ them, to get them a job. Ideally, with some small enterprise or small family business, you just something to give them real world experience. Ever since World War II, we've had an ever diminishing number of young people who have had any kind of experience from an early age, which is to say that we've denied them adventure and fun and knowledge and exposure to customers, production processes, to real life. We've raised many, many generations now that have been excluded from this world. It's been sort of a sign of class, right? That um, uh, how long can you be protected from? How long can I remain insulated from any kind of real world functioning and just sit in this desk and listen to some expert tell me what's what? And and this has gone on for so long, and we have laws that seem to reinforce this and cultural habits that seem to reinforce this, and it's really a calamity. I mean, most kids, the goal is to go to college as long as possible. And finally, you get your first job at 25, and then you enter into the workforce, sort of loaded, and all you do is complain, about everything. Everything seems unpleasant. Well, yeah, everything is unpleasant relative to 6 years of living off somebody else's dime and faking your way through classes. Yeah, work life is unpleasant. But early work experience can essentially change everything, and I think that's the most essential thing that a parent can do is give the kids jobs, give the kids meaning, give the kids adventure, have adult style expectations and responsibilities for them, as early as possible. I think that's going to be really crucial. I'm hoping that the Trump administration, like one of the reforms, I probably should write about this today. One of the reforms they've talked about is eliminating all taxation for all workers under the age of, say, 20. I think that would just be an amazing change, and a real step in the direction of cultural recovery.
I agree. I had a job as early as age 15. I remember reading an editorial that you wrote I think it was a couple of years ago about this subject about early jobs that you had
Yeah.
as well. And I think you're onto something very important there. But I want to take this a different way because right now, at the same time that it would be wonderful to see more kids employed, especially for the confidence that it builds, the skills that they learn, and all these things. At the same time, we have this other juggernaut, which is AI, and of course, it is gobbling up jobs. Knowing that we have that tension on the other side, knowing that even this idea that supposedly safe jobs like being a computer engineer may change dramatically or be phased
Mhm.
out in the coming years. What is your take on AI and how that will affect the job market and the future for young people?
I, of course, I look forward to a complete gutting of the professional managerial class. Like I want to, I'm overjoyed at AI. I want to see mass unemployment, and all the jobs previously held by people doing AI. I think it's a brilliant thing. My worry about AI is that my genuine worry is that it's going to mitigate against people getting an in-depth education, because there's going to be a whole generation raised now that thinks they don't have to know anything because AI knows everything. And that is just simply wrong. I mean, AI is the most useful tool in the history of the world if you already know how to approach it. If you already have some vague historical map in your head or know the questions to ask and so on, it's enormously valuable. If you don't know that, it's the greatest tool for mass manipulation the public mind ever invented.
Mhm.
So, you know, um, I don't know. It's going to be a struggle because, like I say, most young people are, like right now are under the impression that they really don't need to know anything, since AI knows everything.
Mhm.
And that's a serious problem. I mean, I don't know how you get people back to reading, and I mean, part of me thinks, that every home should just have a library of physical books in it. With the rise and fall of Roman Empire and all the great books, and you can buy them, on Amazon very cheaply, but get the great books, read them all, master them, and if you have a large um, knowledge base in your head, then AI becomes enormously useful to you. That will also give you a competitive advantage, I think, in the future of the workplace.
I completely agree. With this idea, I've been hearing about another aspect of this, which is cognitive, I think it's called cognitive diminishment, where AI begins to take on more and more of the tasks, the intellectual tasks that we once did. And in the same way that people, once they get out of school, begin to lose the math skills that they once had because they're not practicing them, that we're in store for the same type of danger if we outsource so much of the mental work that we used to do to AI.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. There's a tendency. I think it's going to make us intellectually lazier than we already are, which is not a good thing. So I don't know. I don't exactly know what to do about that. I feel so bad for college professors right now. Like I just don't know what I would do. Uh, I remember some years ago. standing in front of about 350 kids in a high school gymnasium. They wanted me to talk about economics. And I decided to start this by drawing on people's experience. And I asked for a show of hands of how many people have had, a job. And these are like seniors in high school, right? And out of 350 kids, like two hands went up.
Wow.
And I stood there and I thought, nothing I say is going to matter to anybody. They're just here. Their one skill is to sit and pretend to listen.
Yeah.
That's their one skill that they have. And they're going to sit and pretend to listen to me for the next hour.
Mm.
And I realized that my talk would be useless to them. Uh, um, so I changed my entire thing to just urging them all to go out and get some kind of job as soon as possible.
Well, I think that, and not only that, but it would help from an emotional standpoint as well. I think there's so much navel gazing that's going on with the younger generation. There's so much time spent on cultivating your image and your profile online and dealing with your victimhood. If you're doing something, especially if you're involved in an activity that benefits others, you get to focus off of yourself.
Yeah, it's really true. I'm very sympathetic to this idea that if it's at all possible as a parent, that you should not give your kids cell phones for as long as possible. I mean, just wait until I don't know how long you can wait really realistically, but as long as possible before they have access to these kind of things like physical books and staying offline, no social media. It's just terrible. It's a terrible thing. I mean, I'm on X all the time because it's a great free speech platform and it's changing the world. But that's sort of also my professional job, but if I were raising children right now, I think I would keep them as far away from social media as possible, especially, rotten, like TikTok and Instagram and all that crap. I mean, this stuff is just a disaster for kids' attention spans and so on. Yeah, writing, reading, and writing, and learning math. I mean, I hate to say it, but it was like we need to go back to a 19th century style education.
Yes.
I think it's the most important thing. We've seen this actually. We see it right now. Um, that the most high performing professionals right now are generally coming out of a kind of a homeschool or composite sort of um, community-based schooling environment, not big mega public schools or conventional institutions.
Right.
Most of the people working for Elon Musk, for example, this is their background. They're homeschool kids. Uh, this is, I think, the way to go. I mean, and what's funny about this is that homeschooling, even 10 years ago, was it sort of existed under a cloud. But this is one of the inadvertent, I would say, mistakes of the ruling class. Like during COVID, they got rid of schooling for a year or two, during which time they made sort of homeschooling mandatory. And that changed a lot of parents' attitudes towards schooling and made them start to take the education of their children seriously. And now I don't think there's any doubt about homeschooling. The public schools are basically being emptied out right now, and the private schools are full for anybody who can afford them. So homeschooling's and other hybrid models are becoming a normal feature of American life. This is one of the big changes that's happening that's mostly unannounced and unacknowledged. But schooling in this country is in complete upheaval right now.
Sure, I agree with you. I think another aspect of this we haven't touched on as much is the cultural aspect, and knowing that what is going on politically is an outgrowth of our culture, especially the entertainment and the works of art that we were introduced to. From that angle, going back to this idea of being vigilant, what can individuals do to create the kind of culture that would go back to these old values that we once had and to turn the situation around?
Yeah, staying off mass media, but again, I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. Uh, 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 what is this, Monday? So Saturday night, this is 2 days ago, Saturday Night Live held its 50th anniversary episode, but it really seemed like, and they're all toasting to the next 50 years. Yeah, I doubt it. I think it's done. I think that whole world is done.
Really?
Yeah. I think mass media and mass entertainment and all the old establishments and all the old shows and everything, they've completely discredited themselves. And they're, and it's not just about Trump, although we use him as a kind of a template of understanding. But the fact that they invade against any kind of change, and the change came anyway,
Hmm.
puts them all in the category of the old order
Yes.
and not in the category of the new order. The new order is a world based in family, community, truth, and faith, and turning off the mass media. Uh, they're under enormous pressure right now. I mean, RFK is talking about eliminating pharma advertisement. If that happens, most of what we call mass media is going to collapse,
What do you
and
think
I,
will,
I welcome that.
I mean, I do too. So if we're going away from especially this model that reflects a monoculture, especially, what would the new art forms look like, and where would they be distributed?
Art.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't really have the answers to that, but I think it's going to, in some sense, be very old-fashioned. The kinds of habits and social structures and cultural tropes that characterized the world before the Great War is most likely. Uh, I meant the Great War, World War One, is most likely where we're headed. To something more real,
Mhm.
and that was World War One was the turning point where um, uh, there was the managerial revolution where the world became compulsory and fake and filled with conscription and death and where the experts ruled everything from the center. And in the absence of that, you end up in a much more of a community-based life with regenerative agriculture, concerns over health and faith and so on. I mean, this is the rest of our lives. I mean, this is going to go on decades. This sort of recovery of what we've lost.
Mhm.
And by the way, I think we're just at the beginning of this process. I'm fully expecting that sometime within the next year, we're going to find out things about our own ruling class managers that nobody ever imagined possible.
Mhm.
Um, like the biggest financial scams in the history of the world. I mean, we might not even have a budget crisis. Like once you eliminate all the fakery and money laundering and fraud, I mean, it might be that we can, have a balanced budget with no problem whatsoever, even eliminate the income tax. And people are talking like this right now. Like maybe let's get rid of the income tax. Why are we stealing everybody's money all the time? What good is it? What is it? People are asking these fundamental questions, but I think the transition period is going to be a very long one, really, and it's going to be a very exciting one, but also pain. It'll be psychologically painful for us
Mhm.
to gradually discover just the sheer breadth and depth of corruption and fakery that has characterized the world essentially since World War II.
Yeah.
But I think that's where we're headed. I'm sorry to say that, but um, I don't. It's not that I don't welcome it. I do. I'm sorry that we had to go through all this stuff, but the COVID lockdowns and everything that followed was a turning point. Where all the elites turned on the people, and the people are fighting back.
Yes.
And 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 I've asked the question for a very long time. Like we've really had a revolution in this country, like what would it look like in an industrial democracy? Like we think we know what that looks like in Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union, Russia, and this sort of thing. But what does it look like in an industrialized democracy like the US and Europe? And we're gradually finding out what it looks like. I think it's going to be peaceful, and I think it's going to improve things overall. But the transition from here to there is going to be quite something to behold.
I agree. Well, I want to say thank you, Jeffrey, for your invaluable insights today. If people want to follow your work, how can they do so?
Well, I'm posting on X all the time at Jeffrey A. Tucker, and I run Brownstone Institute, which is a sort of research support infrastructure for figuring out the world and the post lockdown world, trying to come to terms with all the changes philosophically and otherwise, and what this new paradigm of life may look like. That's sort of our job. And I think we're the only think tank on the planet that does this, actually. So, but yeah, I'm writing there once a week and every day for Epoch Times.
Wonderful. Well, I love your work and thank you again, Jeffrey. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.